Hello, everyone, and welcome to Milwaukee's Tailgate Brewers podcast, part of the MKE Tailgate Network. This is episode 364. My name is James. I'm joined by Ryan and Paul as we are doing this on Sunday morning before the Packers playoff game. I'm not expecting much on that front, Paul. I know you're not really either. I know you cover on the mini pod. There is a path to victory as always, but it's going to be tough, and the Eagles are just really good.
Yeah, they're a really, really good team. The one thing the Packers do have going for them is that they do have a far superior quarterback. Like Jordan Love is quite a bit better than Jalen Hurts. Hurts is like a weird good. He's a decent enough outside passer. He's a very good runner. They get the sneaks every single time, but he's pretty inaccurate. He doesn't really throw to the middle of the field. He gets sacked on 9% of his dropbacks, which is a really, really, really high number. So it always helps to have the best quarterback in the game. But didn't help the Chargers last night at all, not even a little. So
that was an atrocious game to watch. Yeah,
that game kind of ticks me off because Houston, I think, is the biggest frauds in the playoffs. Their defense is good. Like defense is really, really good, but the offense is really bad. You just cover Nico Collins. It's all you got to do. There's one guy, just one guy. And Harbaugh really messed that game up. That was a bad job by them. But Packers, I think it'll be close. They can maybe steal it, but Eagles are good. They're a good team.
Yeah, I just generally said too, I don't know why I'm excited for this year's playoffs. Maybe it's because I have no expectations for the Packers, so I'm not anxious about it. And there's the possibility of a lot of exciting, hopefully new champions. If the Chiefs three-peat, I'll be upset, or if the Vikings make the Super Bowl, I'll be upset. But outside of that, I think I'm just kind of, just willing to go along for the ride. Ryan, what do you think?
Yeah. I was going to mention that the Badger basketball team has been winning games by a lot, which I wasn't necessarily
on fire.
Yeah, they've been really, really good. And they score a lot of points. It's all very strange. I don't know who that team is anymore. I become accustomed to a certain thing in the Stu Jackson and Stan Van Gundy era. Dick Bennett through Bo Ryan through Greg Gard, you come to expect a certain thing, and it's not been that for this year.
They turned into the vintage Golden State Warriors lately, making 23s a game, and throwing shade at Iowa. I appreciated. Was it? I forget who it said, but after they blew out Iowa, they were just like, one of the players was saying, we didn't expect them to play any defense, and that's what happened. And then Iowa went and beat Indiana the other night. So I don't know. Big Ten's going to be wild this year. But kind of a hopeful start for the conference slate. I'm used to January being where things kind of come crashing down for the Badger men. So we'll see how it goes. But it's been fun to watch so far.
Well, things got really ugly there against Michigan and then against Illinois, but it turns out that they're probably the two best teams in the conference.
Yeah, they're really good.
We just didn't really know it back in early December. It wasn't apparent at that point that they were that good. And now we realize they are. So losing those games just doesn't, and Marquette's obviously one of the top 10 teams in the country. So losing those 3 games is really no shame whatsoever, but you just kind of didn't know it at the time. And now it's this is actually a very good team. So it's wild. Very, very strange.
I need to do a better job of figuring out which freaking network they're playing on any given night, because the Peacock games screw me up. I can't find Big Ten. I understand it, but that's annoying.
Well, I was joking on Blue Sky on Monday. I didn't know they were playing until halftime. I looked at the score and was like, okay, I'm going to keep this off because things are going well.
Yeah.
And then on Friday, I didn't know that they were playing until the game was literally over. All of a sudden, I saw people talking about it being over and the fact that they destroyed Minnesota in the second half. And I'm like, oh, no, I don't think I can watch games anymore. So somebody actually asked me and said, so, Top, you need to not watch the Packers on Sunday.
Yep, exactly. It's like when you went overseas and the Brewers ripped off a 10-game winning streak. Yeah, exactly.
But I did watch Liverpool win big yesterday morning, so apparently I'm not a complete jinx. So there's that.
Well, you're not in the same country they are. So
that's true. That's true. That's
so what you're saying is I can't watch the Packer game.
Yeah,
you got it.
Yeah, find something to do around 3 o'clock, 3 to 6 today. Yeah, that'd be fine. All right. Lots of actual Brewer news to talk about. We had the arbitration filing number exchange deadline just recently, so we'll talk about that in a minute here. But first, As always, a reminder, patrons get question priority here on this podcast and on Reporting as Eligible. All you need to do is go to patreon.com/MKE tailgate. $2 a month there guarantees you get your questions answered both on this podcast and on Reporting as Eligible. The $5 level gets you that perk plus the additional exclusive content. That includes Packers Reporting as Eligible mini pods and the minor league extra with Ryan and Spencer. All right, so as noted, the Brewers avoided arbitration with almost all of their RB eligible players, except for the big one, William Contreras. So Contreras filed at $6.5 million in his first year of arbitration eligibility. The Brewers filed at $5.6 million. So we're talking again about a $900,000 difference here. Oddly, I don't know about oddly, but surprisingly, both of those numbers come in like well short of the MLB trade rumors projections, which are usually pretty spot on. They had him slated for $7.6 million. So we'll talk more about that in a minute, but just wanted to recap the guys who agreed to deals to avoid a hearing. Nick Mears signed a one-year deal for $963,000. That's about $63,000 more than he was projected for. Joel Payamp signed a one-year deal for $2.995 million. So they didn't want to get him to 3, but he was projected at 2.8. Aaron Savali signed for $8 million for this year, and that was spot on with the MLB-TR projections. Nestor Cortez signed a one-year deal for $7.6 million. He was projected for 7.7. And Trevor McGill signed a one-year deal for $1.94 million, just under his $2 million projection. So just want to start talking about those guys and see if there are any surprises there. I guess for me, it was that Savali signed for $8 million. That seemed high, but also I believe he may be further along in the process. But Savali earning more than Nestor Cortez, who we all seem to be penciling in as the number 2 starter now,
Yep.
Paul, kind of jumped out to me. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I know that you make more the further along the process you are, but just in the universal vacuum of the world, any of Savali or Nestor Cortez making more than William Contreras is dumb. But this is the system that we have, so whatever. But yeah, that's weird. Like I don't pay that close attention to arbitration until we get on the podcast. I would have bet $7.6 million that Nestor Cortez was going to make more in it than Aaron Savali was, regardless of how far along in the process they were, and they're both not new. That's strange. I think of Cortez as better. I forget Savali is on the team more than any other Brewer major.
Right.
Like,
right.
I always just, oh yeah, we have that guy. Who are the starting pitchers again? Like, I don't understand that case. I even was browsing both of their statistics, and I still don't understand that case very well. So I would love to actually see the filings there. That seems very, very strange.
Yeah, so both of them are in their last year of arbitration. They both are in year 3 of arbitration.
Yeah.
They're not Super 2s, so they're kind of a perfect comp for each other. I'm looking it up right now, but my guess is that, and it does seem to be that way looking at this. So in their first arbitration, it really matters what your first arbitration is because it sort of moves from there. Cortez, his first arbitration year in 2023, he got 3.2. I'm going to guess Savali just started with a higher platform to build from in that. I got to look it up, but I'm going to guess that Savali started from a higher platform, and that's why it moved the way it did. It's that first year is always kind of the tricky one because you have to like establish, oh, that's interesting because no, it's not. He got 2.6 in his first year, but then he jumped up. He had a better year in 2020. In 2023, he had a better season than Cortez did because that was the year Cortez missed a bunch to injury. Savali jumped from 2.6 to 4.9. So that's what's doing it is that
so
there
caught
was,
him there.
Yeah, basically, yeah, he did that. And I'm assuming that it's just sort of taking into account like one thing that Savali has done is been pretty reliable in terms of innings throughout these arbitration years. If you look at like what he did in 2023, he pitched 122 innings. In 2024, he pitched 161 innings. So he was actually racking up innings. Cortez had some more limitations that way. I don't know if they figure in the time missed to injury last year because it was so minimal and it was like at the end of the season. And actually it was mostly he just missed postseason games. But yeah, it's yet another indicator that the arbitration system doesn't operate the way that you would, the way anybody would actually design a system to operate. It's based on precedents and it's based on just sort of a weird understanding of the way things go. But nothing else really stands out. It really, frankly, it goes to show how good MLB Trade Rumors generally is. They're hitting most of these numbers very, very close, which is why, and I know we're about to talk about it in a minute, which is why the Contreras thing does kind of stand out, that they were so, I mean, for them to be more than $1 million higher than the Contreras' filing point is wild to me. The fact that his high end would end up there. I don't know. Did you guys listen to Effectively Wild at all? And they talked about the weird case, and I forget the guy's name right now, but they were talking about the weird case. It was in 1980, where a guy actually filed below what the team was willing to offer him.
Oh, God, no. Oops.
Yeah, he was in Oakland.
Fire your agent.
Yeah, he was in Oakland A. Well, I kind of wondered, did he even have an agent? At that point, he was like a fringe major leaguer. I kind of wondered if he even had an agent. Like, I don't know if agents were ubiquitous in 1980. Like they would be, now obviously, like everybody has an agent, but I don't know in 1980 if they were necessarily like every single person had an agent or if some of these guys were just doing it themselves. But yeah, he filed for 50,000 and the team offered 58 and they ended up settling at 56,000. So that was a weird story to listen to. Recommend listening to that one. But yeah, the system is just weird and it produces weird results. And I don't know. I was talking a little while ago about how there's a chance that we could do away with arbitration entirely down the road, or maybe minimize its effect by quite a bit. And I think the path to doing that is what was established in this last CBA by the bonus pool thing, which you don't hear much about. You don't hear, we didn't hear what Jackson Churio got this year from his bonus pool. I'd be interested to find out how much, because presumably he got some sort of a reward for being such a good player in, his 0 to 3 years. But there does seem to be a path here towards, maybe doing away with this. But, and especially in light of the fact that Kurt was talking about the fact that there doesn't seem to be a mechanism in here for there to be growth in arbitration salaries, despite not just overall inflation in the world, but like the free agent market increasing, those things going up. This isn't tied to that. Precedents, you can go back a decade for precedents, which, the Brewers will be doing in this hearing. So it's just a very, very strange system, and it doesn't work the way anybody would think it should.
So the bonus pool, pre-arb bonus pool list was released in mid-December. I think it kind of flew under the radar a little bit. We didn't really talk about it. It may have just fallen during that holiday time. But pulling up, the AP had the full list. Probably unsurprisingly, Bobby Witt Jr. pulled in the most, a little bit more than $3 million, finishing high up in the MVP rankings. We'll do that. Paul Skeens was second with $2.1 million. William Contreras in the top 5, though, earned $1.72 million in addition to what he'll be making coming up in RB. Jackson Churio earned $901,000 and change there. So that was nice. But it went all the way down to, I believe, Sal Frelick was the final one to pull some money. Yeah, Sal got an additional $232,000. There's probably some more Brewers that I'm missing on this list. Tobias Myers got an extra $312,000, stuff like that. So,
and that makes a big deal for somebody like, especially him, because Tobias Myers, to my knowledge, I don't think he got a big bonus or anything. Frelick did get a big bonus. So that means a little bit less, but Myers getting a big chunk of change, that does matter. That's good. Hopefully they find ways to keep pumping more and more money into this system.
Yeah.
Because it is one of the few things that players who are in that 0 to 3 range have going for them, for means to actually make some money above the minimum.
Right. yeah, it's some insurance too for the guys who, maybe flourish for 1 or 2 years, but don't quite make it to RB and are facing non-tenders. At least they get some change that way.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk Contreras, because as we know, the Brewers are typically what they call a file and trial team, meaning they treat that arbitration figure exchange deadline as sort of a deadline for all negotiations. If you don't agree to a deal before then, you're going to the hearing. But there have been some notable exceptions. Most recently, Devin Williams last year, where they just missed that deadline, but shortly after exchanging figures, they agreed to a 2-year deal. Of course, the Brewers then turned down that option, and that led to the mess that we're seeing this offseason. But I guess if that doesn't happen with Contreras and we go to a hearing, Paul, putting your lawyer hat on, I know you love to do this for arbitration. What do we anticipate the arguments on both sides of the hearing being here? Because, he's kind of treated as the best young catcher in baseball. I think he was like number 1 on MLB Network's list. So how do you do this?
I don't. First of all, that number seems quite low on both sides, yes, but especially on the Brewers. And I can see baseball teams trying to historically go cheap on catcher because a lot of catcher value is locked up in things that are not arbitration statistics. Like in arbitration, garbage like saves counts a lot. Like traditional statistics count a lot. I suspect like framing WAR probably doesn't matter at all. Could be wrong, but I very much doubt it. And so, my first thought was just, well, maybe that's just the explanation, but that's not the case here. William Contreras has very good traditional stats in addition to being good at soft skills too. Like, he hit 281, 365, 466 this year. Like, that's a good hitting line for, honestly, on this team, any position, let alone catcher. It's one of the best catcher lines in the league. He hit 23 home runs. He averages 20 home runs a year for the last 3 years. Like, I wouldn't want to take this case to trial if I was the Brewers. I feel like there's a lot of dumb stat arbitration weapons available to Contreras' side, in addition to stuff like down ballot MVP votes and all-star games and Silver Slugger awards. Like, all that stuff, all that garbage counts too. Like, I understand if like looking at the Brewers at a high level and how they have developed the team and how they create value. We have this team full of outstanding defensive guys, only a few of whom can actually hit okay. I will take any of those guys into arbitration any day of the week and be like, Bryce Turang can't hit a lick. We're not paying him jack. And arbitrators usually going to go, oh, all right, that guy sucks. Don't pay him. But you walk in with this case, and I don't like this. I don't want to defend this guy. I would much rather be on Contreras' side in this case. So I would wager they lose this, and I'm surprised it's not higher. I also would like to go back and just look at what people's records are when trade rumors is off by X. If they can be used sort of as a predictor of if a team's not going to be victorious in arbitration, because they're likely looking at all of those kind of obvious arbitration level statistics as well to make their usually quite spot on projections. And this one seems like that. Like, you look at Contreras' production and you come up with that trade rumors 7.6 or whatever it was. That makes a lot of sense to me, just eyeballing it here. So I think that this one's probably a little bit more likely to settle than usual, because I suspect the Brewers will kind of see that as well. And B, I think it's weird they filed so low. I feel like this is one where you maybe just wanted to come together a little bit more.
Well, so here's why what happened. Kurt has a very good breakdown on this on the Journal Sentinel. And have we said the name Cal Raleigh yet? Because this is all about Cal Raleigh.
We have not mentioned the Big Dumper.
Yeah, no. We have not mentioned Big Dumper yet. Okay, so Cal Raleigh just did this, and he settled with the Mariners for $5.6 million. And he is an almost perfect comp to William Contreras in terms of like platform year and everything, right down to the fact that last year William Contreras' Fangraphs WAR was 5.4. Cal Raleigh's was 5.4 as well. And he just settled, like literally on the deadline day, he just settled for the $5.6 million. So the Brewers just went from that. So this is basically almost an exact rerun of what happened with Corbin Burns and Shane Bieber when he went into arbitration, and like because Bieber settled on the day of the hearing for a certain amount, and the Brewers could look and say, oh yeah, we can easily make the case that William Contreras is comparable to Cal Raleigh. So that's what this is going to be. They're going to talk about that, and I would guarantee you things they're going to bring up in the hearing. So things that like that the team will bring up to like try to say that he's like even worse than Raleigh will be the fact that he's not nearly as good a framer as Raleigh. Like Raleigh is one of the best defensive catchers in baseball, and Contreras is definitely better, especially in 2023. He was better than when he had been with the Braves, but he regressed some last year defensively and wasn't the framer that he was before that. I don't know. Like Paul, you were saying you're not sure how much that figures into arbitration hearings. I don't know. Because
we don't know. Like arbitrator, the one thing that's a little bit of a black box about it still is how much any adaptation of advanced statistics has made its way into arbitration. And the one thing we know for sure is on closers, it hasn't like at all. On position players, maybe a little bit more. But I still love this case from the Brewers' perspective because like they can bring framing and do it. That's fine. I can walk in and be like, yeah, my guy hit, Cal Raleigh hit 220 last year. My guy hit 280. And
right.
I'm guessing you old arbitrator still care about that at least a little bit. And even if you've read Moneyball, Cal Raleigh's on base percentage was 220 last year. And Williams was 312 last year.
Mm-hmm.
Williams was like 365. Like that's a significant offensive difference. I'd be comfortable walking in with that. There's the home runs, are the one thing that maybe makes a big difference here for sure. And that's maybe what the Brewers are thinking. Maybe it just comes down to that. Batting average versus home runs, and it's 14 additional home runs for a significant amount. But I don't like. I would still love to walk in with the Contreras offensive stats to this. I think I would do fine. He also finished better in voting in things like that in All-Star balloting and MVP balloting. I'll take this every day.
Yep. Yeah. 2-time starting catcher for the National League back-to-back. Like that's the one thing that maybe could win that case for Contreras as well.
Yeah, I was going to say that would be a thing that like Contreras's people can bring up in the hearing. Okay. So he actually had 100. Cal Raleigh hit 100 RBI right on the nose versus Contreras, who is at 92. So like that from everything we've heard, these arbitration hearings, it comes down to stupid crap like that. It's saves, right. It's RBIs, it's But you're right about the batting average. That would be if they want to make the case that their number is better than the Cal Raleigh case. Like that, it would be interesting. I would love to know if they bring up Fangraphs WAR in that hearing. If anybody mentions it, because like the Brewers, it is a perfect comp. Like it's literally the same number between the two of them. So. Yeah, it would be interesting. I don't know. I think that for the Brewers to avoid the hearing at this point, Contreras would probably have to agree to a multi-year deal. I think that's the exception to the file and trial, right? And that was why they continued to talk after filing last year. Why Williams and the Brewers continued to talk was because they were willing to do the second year option on that deal. They were willing to negotiate that, and so that was kind of how they got around the file and trial thing. I don't know if we have that this year, like that aspect of it. So yeah,
I'm bringing up doubles in that hearing. That's as soon as they bring up home runs, like Cal Raleigh hit 16 doubles, William hit 37 doubles, William hit 38 the year before to 23. Those home runs are great, but my guy's doing it all. So
I don't know. We'll see too if the Brewers try to pull what they did allegedly with Corbin Burns, where they pointed to a subpar second half as well. They could maybe do that with Contreras because he hit just 271 in the second half compared to 286. But of course, the Brewers were also just putting him in the lineup every day with no days off. So what comes first, their chicken or the egg? It'll be interesting to see.
Contreras kind of finished stronger too. Like he had a dip in the middle of the season. Like it was real bad in what was it, June, July. He was really like after getting off to a blistering hot start, but then he recovered.
His June was horrible.
Yeah, he had a bad June. Okay.
Yeah, we'll see. I don't know. I think too, what factored into Williams doing the 2-year deal is that was Williams' last 2 years of ARB, right? We're not covering the first 2, so I think to your point, if the Brewers were looking at multi-year, maybe they'd want to buy out all the ARB years at this point, and I don't know if William would want to do that on the current trajectory. Yeah. He'd be selling himself short. All right. I guess on a more positive note, Adam McKelvey brought up that Brandon Woodruff is sort of on track to be ready to go, according to him, at least health-wise, and news is looking good. He said he was, quote, in a really, really good spot, and that he's, quote, given the go-ahead with his standard off-season ramp-up process, and he's now throwing twice-a-week bullpen sessions of fewer than 30 pitches. MLB trade rumors also summarized it, saying the next steps will involve extending the pitch count and tossing multiple simulated innings, then facing live batters. The Brewers' assistant athletic trainer has worked with Woodruff, quote, multiple times this offseason, and he's slated to visit the team's spring camp site this week to throw at the pitching lab. Notably, he has not tested his velocity this season. That was a planned tactic, so he could focus simply on testing the shoulder and getting back used to pitching again, rather than trying to hit, any specific checkpoints on his fastball. The focus on process is probably why he can't yet guarantee that he'll be ready for opening day, even though, quote, I can tell you my mindset is to get ready for that. I think for me, the idea of the velo is what's going to be the telling indicator, right? But I think it's probably smart for them to not have him focus on that. You don't want him getting dejected this early in the process if he's coming in mid to high 80s. But I guess, Paul, does this move the needle much for you in terms of what your expectations are for him this year?
Not really, mostly because it's pretty non-specific. He's in a good spot can mean a lot of different things. Having tested velocity is fine and probably a good idea when a guy's rehabbing to not have the temptation to try and ramp things up if nothing else. But this isn't information that's particularly useful other than he hasn't had a setback, apparently. So shoulder injuries are notoriously difficult to come back with. The trajectory for doing so is not great. Sometimes it works. Often it does not. And until we actually see him throw in some competitive situation, even just like spring training ramp up, we're not going to know anything. So this is the kind of news that it's better than a setback has happened, but it doesn't move the needle because it's not like he's made great progress or he's out there hucking 95, or he wouldn't be doing that anyway. But that would be actually dangerous to be doing. But no, this is a nice flowery update, but I don't think it's anything more than that.
Yeah, I think there's, like you said, the main value of this is to know that like there hasn't apparently been a setback. He hasn't had something like that happen, so it's not there hasn't been a disaster, at least so far in the rehab process, which is good to know. But yes, it's very non-specific, and it's coming from Woodruff. It's coming from his perspective, so he would probably be inclined to be more positive on things. It is notable that the doctors cleared him to ramp up and do the full like normal ramp up. Like that is a kind of a data point we can use and say, okay, well, if the doctor is saying, okay, you're clear to do your normal preseason ramp up, okay, that is a very positive sign. But again, it doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot. Looking forward a little bit to what will inevitably be a lot of heavy breathing about this, depending on what, the first time we start hearing velocity numbers on Brandon Woodruff, whether it's we see it in a game, which we probably would. I would imagine they're probably going to want to hide him on like backfields and like pitching in minor league games and things like that. And not necessarily like, I wouldn't expect like game 2 of the minor league season, or sorry, of the spring training season, we're all of a sudden going to see Brandon Woodruff throwing on TV with a gun there, radaring things. But as soon as we start hearing reports about the velocity, that's obviously going to be a thing. And I would suspect that they're probably going to be somewhat low. because a lot of pitchers start off easy in spring training with a lower velocity anyway, and then sort of ramp up as they go there. So we're going to have to be very careful not to read anything into, somebody hears a report that Brandon Woodruff was throwing 90 or 91 miles an hour on his fastball, and the world is going to freak out about that, or our tiny little corner of the world anyway is going to freak out about that. And we got to be more careful about that, because there's a lot of different things that go into ramping up and how hard guys are necessarily throwing, especially early in camp. We don't want to jump to conclusions on that stuff. So it's going to be a process of letting it play out and hopefully seeing where we get to. Last we saw him, his fastball velocity was averaging about 96. So as sort of an idea of once we get a firm enough sample size, once we've seen enough from him, how does it compare to that? If I had to guess, it's probably not going to be fully at that point, because shoulders are the devil, and we've talked about that endlessly. But and also just because like he's still building back up, so it's not going to be. I would be very surprised if he came back, throwing with the velocity he did pre-injury, because this isn't like Tommy John where you fix one ligament, and oftentimes that does actually happen with Tommy John with elbows. Shoulders are different.
Yep.
Right. That leads us to our first Patreon question this week from Baseball Needs More Chest Lettuce, asking, seems as if all of the Brewers beat writers are trying to write off any hope of a Brandon Woodruff being Brandon Woodruff, listening to Dominic Contreras. It sounds like this rehab did not progress well and is not set up for spring training. Is there some there? I'm afraid we might never see Woody pitch again. Ryan, I'm not aware of this segment, so I can't speak to that. But I think, we're all just being overly cautious just because we know the history of shoulders, as you say, are not great. So, if he does come back, it'd kind of be notable and unexpected. But I guess any further thoughts on where we should set the level of expectations here?
Yeah, I mean, it's just everybody's going to have sort of a different interpretation of this, and the words that it's very hard because the words that people use, it all is going to vary against expectations. If I also did not hear this segment, so I don't know what we're referencing here. So I can't really. I'm just going off of what was written by Adam McCalvey, which is basically the opposite of this, which is that the rehab has progressed well and that he is going to head to spring training on time and ready to go for spring training. Like those are literally the words that Adam McCalvey used in that piece. Whether or not he'll be ready for opening day, I think is the other, an open question. And he is saying that that's what we're getting from that article. But yeah, this is just tricky, and it's all about, I think it really is managing expectations. And we have been trying. I know everybody I'm listening to on this stuff, Jack and Spencer both know pitching really, really well. Kurt and JR, everybody is trying to be as cautious as possible with this and saying, don't expect much out of him because shoulders are the devil. Shoulder injuries are bad, which we're going to get into more a little bit later because I have a collection of guys to talk about on that front.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I guess the only other big news out of the Brewers this week was the return of postseason almost hero Jake Bauers on a minor league deal with a spring training invite next month. That leads us to a Patreon question from Robin Yount asking, Jake Bauers, I get it, yet I find it depressing. Help me out. Paul, I know you're not the biggest Jake Bauers fan either, but I don't know. Minor league deal. May as well see what he can do.
It's a minor league deal. It's fine. It's not a big deal. And if nothing else, Jake Bauers is a pretty good defensive player. So, that's fine. If you have a late inning lead and he's on your bench, that's fine. You can bring him in. That's one of the areas where they actually currently don't have great defense at first base with the current personnel. So maybe he'll make the team and still chip in. Who knows? But he's just a guy. Jake Bauers has the benefit of being a guy who almost excelled in the he did. He excelled in the postseason, and then things went bad. But so there's probably some fan love for Jake Bauers out there. Not even against that, but this is very Brewers. He really is just a dude who stands out there and plays good defense and hits not quite well enough to be a Major League Baseball player.
Yeah, and I would say that it's like almost never, if not completely never, the case that like adding a guy on a minor league deal doesn't prevent you from looking for better upgrades at positions that guy, like they're not stopping looking for, especially like a third baseman who can play. They're not holding off on looking because they signed Jake Bauers. Jake Bauers signing doesn't really matter to that. And I would strongly guess here that Bauers has an opt-out in his deal where, like, if by a certain date, and it could be like, if he doesn't break camp with the team, he has the option to become a free agent. Or, sometimes it's like May 15th or something. I bet you he has an opt-out clause in there where if there's something better out there for him, he can go and pursue that at, such and such a date if he's not on the Brewers roster. And so, yeah, this is just, it's a depth building thing, and it's a matter of convenience. So yeah, I would really not read much into it. It's just, it's good to build depth. It's good to have depth going into camp.
PJ Wessels on Patreon, semi-related, asking, still no full major league free agent signing for the Brewers. Does one get signed before February 1st? Ryan, I know you were having a bit of a crisis of confidence, but you told yourself that we weren't going to get worried until about February. So what do you think?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't say before February 1st. I would say before camp, they're going to sign somebody. I would be kind of shocked if they didn't. I think before camp, they're going to sign somebody, whether or not that's before or after February 1st. They've done good business in February before. They have done, they've made significant signings in February. So if it's not by February 1st, don't read that much into it. But yeah, I mean, probably late January seems to have been a pretty productive time for them. That's when they did the Kane and the Yelich things, and so late January seems to make a lot of sense. But if it's February 10th that they go out and do something, I wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah, I'm just going to take the over on all of these questions until they actually do something. I do think that they are a little bit more. They're going to be a little more guarded about their money and are a little bit more precarious because of their cable deal thing than in the past. So I do think they'll bring somebody in. It probably won't be that. I'll be whelmed by it at best, but I bet it doesn't happen by February 1st. I'll bet we're hanging on for a little while longer here.
Yeah, as we talked about last week, the 1-year deal on the cable extension, if you want to call it that, kind of makes it tough to do anything multi-year at this point, just because they don't know what revenues are going to be. All right, JD asking, they're not seriously going into the season with Dunn, Durbin, Monasterio as the third base options, right? So Paul, similarly, possibly. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me.
So here's the thing: I don't think they will, but I guarantee that whole front office is like, well, if nothing breaks our way, we're comfortable with this. We can mix and match and blah, 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 and it'll work out fine. So probably not, but I'll bet that they would be perfectly happy to do so. I think that their projections probably show them, like what Zips has them, about 86 games, and that they can manage their way to a few more than that with what they've got. And they don't care about being entertaining on the field. We know that very well. So, yeah, I don't think that this will be what it is. But if it is, I won't be surprised either. So, yep, this is what we root for.
So I mentioned a name specifically about like third base. I mentioned a name on Blue Sky this week, I believe. I haven't seen a whole ton of talking about him, but I've seen him mentioned. Paul DeJong. Or DeJong? Paul DeJong. Yeah, DeJong. Last year, in only 482 plate appearances, he popped 24 home runs for two different teams, and played above average defense at third base. Now, the less said about his 276 on base percentage, the better. That's not great. But the
selling up for power, the very definition of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And he strikes out a ton. He had 32% strikeout. Like the downsides of him are obvious, but the thing this team needs the most is power. Like that is the one thing that the most glaring need that they have. And it seems like he's a guy who could offer you, a significant number of home runs, a good solid number of home runs for relatively cheap, and you wouldn't have to sacrifice defense at third base to get it. And so I think that could make a lot of sense if they're continuing on like the bargain path. This is not the kind of signing that's going to excite anybody. Hell, it might even be a minor league signing. Like the way these things go, he might have to accept a minor league deal here. But it still seems like something that would improve the team, and it would help them in the way that they most specifically need help, which is he does offer some power. So
this is definitely going to happen. And
okay.
You already know why, based on that statement. For his career, Paul DeJong, a right-handed batter, has an OPS of 731 against righties and a 658 against lefties.
Yes,
he's got your reverse platoon splits. It's guaranteed. So,
all right,
well, we were talking about the reverse platoon splits a little bit, and maybe that's the secret sauce to the Brewers running in scoring position stuff. So, I'm going to run with that theory until it's not true anymore. But yeah, that definitely tracks. It's a Brewersy as hell signing. It would be, at least. Yeah. All right. Adam Post asking this week, please predict the overall stat line for Colin Ray, who signed with the Cubs for $5 million this week in games started against the Brewers this season. Is it inevitable that he'll have an ERA under 2 against the Brewers? I don't know about the season-long ERA and multiple starts, but there is definitely, Paul, an 8 shutout inning performance coming. I just feel it in my bones.
Definitely, maybe even a no-hitter.
Yes, yeah.
Colin Ray is, he's fine. He's pretty good. He's okay. And so I would expect him against our probably not great offensive lineup to do pretty well with having stuff put into play and a bunch of frustrating ground outs and stuff like that. So I think he'll have like a 3 ERA against us. He's usually in the 4, and probably have at least 1 or 2 games where he shuts us out for 8 innings. I think that is my likely pick here. Not just because of jinxy, nonsense of players coming back and beating us bad, but partially just because he's, I feel like, the kind of pitcher who kind of works well against what the Brewers are going to be fielding out there in terms of hitting next year. Ray's fine, and average pitcher against the Brewers lineup is going to do pretty well. And average pitcher against the Brewers lineup with the juju of having pitched for us before and now playing for a division rival is going to get at least a couple of bonus starts where he's absolutely dominant.
So if I remember correctly, the Brewers turned down basically exactly this money, right? They had a $5 million option on him for this year. Yep. And so he basically signed back for what that, and to me, what that says is the Brewers sort of understood what his value was and what like the fair market value of him was. And they still said, nah, we don't need that. We can do better and find better uses for that money than doing that. And so I do wonder, I think there is something to the idea that he may have, because he did trail off so hard at the end of last year, there may have been some significant signposts that they were looking at that Colin Ray was not washed, but like that the tricks that they had used to get production out of Colin Ray over the previous, 2 seasons were no longer going to be as viable as they had been. So I tend to
figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah. That it's just not. And remember, Colin Ray is well into his 30s at this point. I think he's 33, 34, which is, sort of a decline point that guys will often hit anyway, even if he doesn't necessarily have a huge amount of innings, though he's pitched, a pretty large amount over the last couple of years for the Brewers. Yep. So yeah, I tend to think that this is going to work out not that great for the Cubs. And that the Brewers certainly know, like within their, if any team is going to be sort of equipped to know, okay, here are the weird tricks that Colin Ray uses to get hitters out. The Brewers are going to know all those things. And if they can communicate them to their batters, that should be fine. Now, Ray, having been on the team with these guys, is going to know some weaknesses that the batters themselves have, because most of the guys are coming back. So he'll be familiar with those. But I don't know how actionable that is for Colin Ray, because what is he going to be able to do to adjust to those sorts of things? So it's going to be interesting. I'm curious to see what it's like. But honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if he probably has at least one decent start against them. And I bet you he at least once gets cuffed around quite a bit. So, it would be a big deal. Colin Ray pitching at Wrigley in cold weather. I don't know what our series against the Cubs are. I certainly wouldn't like his odds if he was pitching with the wind blowing out hard at Wrigley. That sounds like a setup for disaster, as it is with most pitchers, frankly.
Yeah, I don't know. We talked about Colin Ray a bit when they made that decision to not bring him back, and I don't think we were too heartbroken. I do think that there's some value still left in him, whether it's a year or two, and if anyone can get it out of him, the Cubs pitching development and pitching coach staff, it is generally good, and they can get some good stuff out of those guys, and he adds a solid piece to the back end of that rotation. So that's annoying. But again, like you were kind of saying, the Brewers knew they had other options and could use that money wisely. It's more the fact that the Brewers are deeper than the Cubs are and just didn't have a spot for them. It's a good landing spot for them, as annoying as it might be.
Yeah, it raises the floor of their pitching staff. There's no question about that, but they had a pretty decent floor to begin with, and also just they have some depth there in the minor leagues as well. So, yeah.
It's a good rotation. The bullpen's the question for them. We'll see what they do up to February as well. Michael Parr asking this week, how much does Blake Perkins end up playing this year? On one hand, on paper, he might be the fifth outfielder, but on the other, Yelich is injury prone and DH possible. Mitchell hasn't played a full season, and Frelick needs to add a few miles per hour to his batted balls. Also, to update, last season, Bally's refused to sell the streaming package outside of Wisconsin, despite Iowa being in market. They would only give us the Cardinals and the Royals, and of course, MLB TV was blacked out. There was no legal way to watch the Brewers regional broadcast in Iowa. So that's even worse. So
that's terrible. If you're in market, you should be able to access it in market. What the hell?
Right.
Exactly.
It's insane. It's like, here, take my money. It's the Fry meme. Like, here, take my money. And like them going, nah, like we don't want your money. Like, for a company going bankrupt to be like, nah, we don't want to take your, like, what the hell is that?
Every $20 they can get their hands on is valuable. Come on.
Kidding.
Yeah. That is preposterous. That's
ridiculous.
Going full on Stephen A. Smith here. Like that is unbelievably stupid. What the hell?
Yeah. Blake Perkins then, Paul.
The question.
The first part of the question. Yeah. I mean, obviously he's one of the most valuable guys in terms of defense, but what do you think?
So he probably doesn't play as much as last year, but probably still quite a lot. One of the problems for Blake Perkins, who honestly I think is a little underrated league-wide because he's like the best defensive center fielder, not just on the team, but like in the league. But he doesn't hit quite as well as some of the other options in center field for the Brewers, like Mitchell. So I think he'll be out there a lot to spell anybody who's hurt. He'll be out there a lot late. Mitchell, of course, also gets hurt all the time, in addition to Yelich being an old man who gets hurt all the time. So I would still bet he plays quite a bit. He's there specifically for that purpose. They have a lot of guys who are very injury prone out there, but he is definitely like more this year, I think, a late inning replacement and a guy to spell guys on days off than he is anything else, and just kind of waiting in the wings for injuries to happen. So I'd say he plays like 2/3 of what he did last year. That'd be my sort of off the cuff guess. But he's still really good, valuable piece. I like Blake Perkins. I'm glad he's on the team.
Yeah, that was exactly where I was going to go too. He had 434 plate appearances over 121 games last year, and I would say 100 games and 300 plate appearances is a pretty good over under. Yeah.
All right, next question. M. Santana asking, how are we feeling about the Reds? I keep forgetting that they got Terry Francona, and in my head, Francona wouldn't go to a team he didn't feel really confident would make the playoffs, and that makes me a little worried. Thoughts? Probably true, given Tito's health problems and stuff. But I think he did something similar when he went to Cleveland. It was a really young and up and coming team who kind of needed that experienced manager there. I think, and we'll talk more about the Reds when we do our season previews and stuff. But Paul, likewise, as they've always been, lots of offense. The pitching's the question, and now they added Gavin Lux, so they have about 27 infielders on their roster.
It's an intriguing, but I'd say still pretty flawed team. Like the Reds haven't really done anything since last year to move the needle for me terribly much. I don't know their farm system as well. Maybe Ryan says they'll have 8 million studs coming up that I don't know about. But they seem kind of the same. And Terry Francona doesn't move the needle for me either. He's fine, but he's not like the kind of manager who gives you a couple extra wins over like the average manager, in my humble opinion. It's I mean, it's mostly the same Reds. I'm not worried about the Reds yet. I got to read more. I haven't read a ton yet. I haven't even looked at their Pacoda stuff yet. But I don't know. I'm not going to be scared of the Reds and the Pirates until somebody tells me that like they have a Mike Trout kind of guy coming up. So I'm good at this point.
So okay, working backwards on that. I think Francona was that kind of impact manager, like in the.
I think he was.
Yeah.
Sure.
Where he is now in terms of that, it's hard because to have that kind of impact, you generally, I think, have to like put in a lot of hours and put in a lot of like time and all of that. So I doubt he has that kind of impact nowadays.
Yeah, like as a younger man in a less sophisticated age of baseball, he totally was. But now every manager is getting fed like a zillion points of data on how to manage all the time. And the unless you are still one of the old-timey manager franchises like Tony La Russa, I know he wasn't last year, but the White Sox are a good go-to for all this stuff. That edge is not as big as it once was. So that's all.
I think Francona could probably be counted on to do a good job taking that stuff in because he worked with two cutting edge organizations, with Cleveland obviously and then Boston before that, were on the cutting edge of things in terms of feeding managers information and all of that. And so he probably still does fine with that, but I just, because of the age thing, because of where he is, and will he, like, how are they going to do in terms of like bringing in a staff to surround him? Because that's nowadays that's more important than anything else, right? Is like building up, not just like having a good pitching coach and a good hitting coach, but it's like you now need like 4 pitching coaches and like 4 hitting coaches. And will they invest? Will they build those things up? I think Derek Johnson obviously is good as their pitching coach, but like how well have they done in terms of building all that up? I don't know. One thing to point out about the Reds is they do have a couple of very good pitching prospects who are some of the best pitching prospects in the game, and they are close to big league ready at this point. Rhett Lauder and Chase Burns are their names. And so, that I don't know how much they impact this season, but they're not far away. Those guys are coming. And I think they have the ability to potentially shift things. I kind of poo-pooed the Brady Singer ad earlier in the offseason because he seems like a really poor match for that park. Yeah, he seems like a bad fit for the park. I didn't understand quite what they were doing with that whole thing. But, Nick Lodolo is improving and I think could end up being kind of good for them. I'm worried about the Reds. I've been on record before saying I'm kind of worried about the Reds. I think they're a team that could jump up. And I said last year I thought they were a team that could jump up too. They didn't, but I think that was mostly just because like they had some injuries and the Matt McClain being out all of last year, that hurt things quite a bit. The lineup is deep. They have the ability, I think, to produce sort of up and down the lineup. The Gavin Lux ad is it's a positive for the offense. I don't know how big a positive, but it's a positive for the offense. I could see the Reds being a problem this year. I could see that, especially if like Ellie last year put up 6.4 WAR. I could see him
Yeah.
going like total supernova and starting to, creep up towards 10 there if he's only 23 years old. So I could see him taking that next step. But yeah, this is the Reds have definitely the potential to be a problem.
Yeah. LA needs to get his on base up. That's the big thing there.
Yep.
But yeah, I feel like I said this to you guys in our group chat. Gavin Lux in Great American Ballpark strikes me as like big Scrooge in that potential, and that he randomly hits 25 home runs there. I don't know.
Yeah, that Notch is going to play with with what he does, because he could pop home runs out to right field in that park with the Notch being what it is. Yeah, I could see it.
Tricky Henderson writing this week on Patreon saying, enjoyed your last chat or your chat last pod regarding edge creating maneuvers in the post catcher's fingers down trash can banging world. Video is no longer exploitable, as the Astros did with a live feed near the dugout. The team video room can no longer easily relay signs, as the Red Sox did. The new ways to exploit the game are more subtle and left to MLB's army of compliance monitors to discover. Info about the program is sparse online, but it's good to know each park has eyes on the ground. But how trained are those eyes? Only Manfred Mann knows. What do you all know about the program, and does its existence at all temper your concerns for chicanery? Bonus points for chicanery use in a Patreon question, but I guess, Paul, does it help knowing that MLB is kind of tracking this more closely?
It helps a little bit, but whenever so I don't know much about the compliance monitor program other than what Tricky and I DM'd about. So here's the thing. I think that any monitoring program will always suffer for not having the same resources and sophistication as Major League Baseball teams do. Sure. And if you really want to cheat, if it's like you find a way that's clever and undetectable, you'll be able to do it. You'll be able to pull it off. And the only way that it'll get picked up will not be by monitors looking for subtle signs or banging the drum, but picking it out of statistical analysis, more than likely, like we pick out fraud and bank transactions and things like that, lack of random numbers and whatnot and stuff like that. Maybe they're doing that too. But it doesn't move the needle for me in terms of a deterrent. It's probably a deterrent to catch dumb people from doing the dumbest possible cheating. But baseball teams, if they're going to cheat, again, are not going to use a garbage can and are going to use very sophisticated techniques and technologies. So no, this does not dissuade my conspiratorial thinking on the subject at all.
So, I mean, it would have caught, like, having these guys, they surely would have figured out the banging thing. Like,
they would have done that.
Like, what the Astros
That's
are
what
doing.
They're there for.
Yeah, they're there to catch the easy things. How individually industrious they are, how willing they are to, like, poke their nose in where people don't want their nose poking in, would be interesting to know. Like, that would be something. How much access do they have? Can they go literally anywhere they want at any time and can't be stopped? Do they have, like, just complete carte blanche as far as that goes? I don't know. I don't know if you came across that answer at all when you were looking. I don't know. It's probably a tricky thing. And there's also almost certainly, there has to be some negotiating with the union that goes on stuff like this too. Like, what kind of access do these monitors get to the players? What do the players have to answer their questions? If they say, hey, what's going on here? Does the player have to say anything, or can the player be like, yeah, I'm not talking to you. Bye. Like, what sort of access? Those would all be questions I would want to know.
Same.
But it's something. It's better than what existed before. So, and it should catch blatant obvious things, and it should also just put sort of a fear of detection into, if there's somebody whose job it is to find out if you're cheating, it like puts at least a little bit of a fear into most people, that to be like, well, there is somebody here watching to see what's going on. So I think I think I'm a little bit more positive about it mattering than Paul, but there's still probably holes in it depending on what their parameters are. Well, I would need to know more about that before I would, say, oh yeah, I think this is really impactful.
Yeah, I bet it's like TSA. Like, there's a cheating scandal with garbage cans. We built something to detect garbage cans. Like, there's a shoe bomb. Now you got to take your shoes off. Like, I bet it's that sophisticated.
That sounds right. Yeah.
More reactionary than preventative.
Right.
Yeah,
Trying to stop the last thing as opposed to the next thing. Yeah.
right. And it's a matter too of is the punishment heavy enough to not make it worth it too? I don't know those answers either. All right, last couple of questions this week. Baseball Needs More Chest Lettuce had a second question asking, fill a rotation with Brewers who had great promise cut short by injury. My schadenfreude of Mark Pryor is becoming a lifetime of Brewers pitching misery. So, Ryan, I believe you mentioned at the top you were kind of working on a list. Who would be on your, I don't want to say Mount Rushmore, but who's your starting rotation of could-have-beens ruined by injury?
Yeah, so I kind of divided into a couple different sections here, and I think there are going to be like a surprising names on here or anything. But like, if you want to talk about Woodruff, I think the best comps there, if he does have his career here cut short by, like we said, shoulders of the devil, they're bad. You don't need to look any further than Teddy Higuera and Ben Sheets to see guys who were great. Like Woodruff was legitimately great, was a legitimate big-time, big league performer for multiple years. And then, like, obviously Higuera and Sheets had their careers cut short. Like, Ben Sheets was on, like, conceivably a Hall of Fame career path through, like, 2004, 2005, something like that. And then the injuries just started to crop up and were really, and then obviously his career just ended after 2008. Though he did catch on with the A's briefly, but he was washed at that point. He was done. So, like, in that category, Jimmy Nelson was one, James, you brought up. Like, Jimmy Nelson as a guy, because he had just started to kind of break out. He was in the process of breaking out the year that he did that. And that's what was, obviously so annoying and so frustrating about that, because it was so stupid. It was just, that was, just a dumb fluke. If he'd slid back on his non-pitching shoulder, Jimmy Nelson may have had he probably would still be pitching with some success at the big league level, but it was just a total fluke. I think more in the spirit of the question, though, I guess Mark Pryor had a big league career too. Mark Pryor isn't that far off from like what Ben Sheets, shorter than Ben Sheets and Higuera, like shorter level of a time of success. But the three big prospects that I thought of, guys who were really promising pitching prospects and would have been good big leaguers, but in every case they had shoulder issues. Kyle Peterson, who was he was a top 10 pick for the Brewers in the late 90s. Mark Rogers, who was the 5th overall pick in the 2004 draft. He was the guy they took, and then they took Yvonne in the second round. And Yvonne had the career, and Mark Rogers, it was always a question of what could have been with Rogers. He had a labrum issue and carpal tunnel, all kinds of just, he was just always hurt. Remember, though, he briefly, was it like 2010, 11, 12, somewhere in there, he like briefly kind of showed that like we saw, we saw a little bit out of him.
Yeah.
And then Paul, one of your favorites, your all-time favorites, Nick Neugebauer. Like,
of course.
Yeah. And he was a guy who things were looking good. Unfortunately, he was pitching for the 2002 Brewers. That's where he got most of his innings. And that was, just not a great place to be in general. But he tore his rotator cuff. And his career just like, he tore his rotator cuff. He didn't pitch at all in 2003, from what I can tell. He pitched down in advanced Class A for the Brewers in 2004 a little bit. And I think basically it was decided he was washed and was done, and he quit. So at that point, he was done with his career. So those were the guys that I thought of. I think maybe that's a little bit more what you were looking for.
More of an old veteran type, but I would like to add Jim Henderson to the batch as well, who caught on late as a 29-year-old, was the Brewers closer for 1 year and blew up his shoulder and basically was never effective again.
Now staff member with the Brewers, so still around.
Yep.
All right. Last question this week comes from Jack B, asking, if you could swap Miller Park / AmFam out for another stadium, which stadium would it be, and where in the Milwaukee area would you put it? I really like this one. For me, Target Field is the best field I've ever gone to. So just take Target Field, plop it down lakeside. I don't know, Paul. What do you think?
That is correct. Yes. It just is. Like, put it near the Summerfest grounds. If you want to move it up north a little bit, that's fine. If you want to put it down in the south side for some more development around Bayview, also fine. But yeah, that'd be perfect. Just do that.
Yeah, put it in Bayview. Then I could walk to games from my house. That would be outstanding. I will totally echo the thing about the lakefront. Like, that's where you want to go for this. But like, okay, Minnesota, yes, good. I don't know. Have either of you been to the Pittsburgh Stadium?
No, I've heard all the good things, but I have not yet been to
list.
Yeah, Pittsburgh is incredible. It's really, really good. And so I would mention that. Problem is, neither of those stadiums have roofs, and we need a roof. We need a roof. I'm sorry. Like we need a roof. This is where we are. Especially if you want to move down by the lake. The wind coming off the lake in April, even into May, and then definitely in like October, you're going to freeze people's asses off doing that. Like, it is going to be cold if you get wind coming in off the lake. And so you're going to need a roof. I know it ruins sight lines. I know it's Andy has his problems with it. Like, Andy Schaff shouts. But like, you gotta, we're Milwaukee. It's 2025. You need a roof on a stadium. If you're gonna, I cannot believe they did not put a roof on the stadium in Minnesota. Like, it boggles my mind, because the misery of going to those games on April and May nights, how do they get anybody to show up for those games? I do not understand it. It's
tough crowd. Minnesotans go outside all the time.
Yeah. You'd have to be, because it would be miserable. Part of this is I would never be able to get my wife to go to a weeknight game, like a night game before like June ever. Like, I understand it. She would just be like, I'm too cold. I do not want to go. So yeah, I need a roof to be able to just like keep my happiness in life. So give me a roof.
I mean, you have a hard enough time, like when you go to San Francisco and go to a Giants game at night in the early season too. You've talked about how just blustery and miserable that is as well, and that's in California, man.
Not in the early season. It's literally like, we went to a game in late July, and people were like, the locals were like wearing like parkas in the outfield for like just a regular night game against the Brewers. Like, the locals sitting in the outfield were wearing parkas because it is that cold, and the wind coming in off the bay and all that. Yeah, it's freezing. Like, what did Mark Twain say about that? That like, the coldest winter he ever spent was a summer in San Francisco. Like, it's no lie.
It's amazing. All right. That'll do it for questions this week. We'll wrap things up here. Thanks again, everyone, for sending those in. A reminder, patreon.com/MKE tailgate. $2 a month gets you that priority. Also want to shout out a new patron, Ryan, that joined on this week. Who do we have?
Tim Young, who, from what I could tell, had never been a patron before. Welcome, Tim. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome aboard.
Yep.
Appreciate it, Tim. Even if you're not a patron, reminder, all of you can support us another way. Please do go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever else you're listening to this, and give us a review there. And while you're there, please be sure to hit subscribe to make sure you don't miss an episode. Tell your friends about us, too, as we ramp up and get closer to spring training. You know, it's always like around Valentine's Day. So we're almost a month out from pitchers and catchers reporting. That off season's kind of going by fast for me. So yeah, make sure you tell your friends about us as we get closer to the 2025 season. That'll do it for this week. Thank you again, everyone, for listening. We will be back here next week to talk about any Brewers news, maybe a William Contreras extension. Fingers crossed, hopefully. I'm not counting on it, but we'll talk about it if it happens. Until then, everybody, have a good week. Go Packers. Hopefully, don't embarrass yourselves. That'll do it for this week on Milwaukee's Tailgate. Have a good one, everyone.